I don't know if I'll be able to finish this. My hand is trembling, my eyes burning with exhaustion. And my head? Well, it hasn't stopped. It hasn't stopped for weeks. I swear this wasn't the plan. I didn't want to revisit any of this. I moved far away, erased every number, blocked everything. I went to therapy, took medication, tried medication, yoga, even religion. But this afternoon, when I came home from work, I found that same smell at my door. A smell you only recognize if you've smelled it before. A mixture of wet wood, rusty iron, and something dead. On the doorknob, there was an object that shouldn't be there. An amulet tied with a leather strap, made of darkened wood, carved with symbols I had seen before, that I had touched before. And that's why I came back to this damned document. Because if this showed up here, it means it's not over, and maybe it never will be. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to hear this story. Maybe you, maybe no one. But I will tell it, because otherwise I think I'll go insane. It all started 3 years ago, when I took a temporary contract to catalog archaeological pieces in a small town in the Maine countryside called Dunwich Hollow. I'm an artifact restorer, or was back then. Museums paid me to identify and restore damaged pieces, mostly those with unclear origins. This project, however, was different. A small historical center in the region had received a shipment of objects from an old Marin family estate, a local historically important name, supposedly founders of the town in the 18th century. The curious thing was that no one could exactly trace where that estate was. They only knew it existed. The objects were covered in mold and moss, as if recently taken out of a damp basement, which, according to reports, was exactly the case. But the basement itself was found accidentally by a farmer digging a septic tank on the forest's edge, near land unused for decades.
I took the job for a simple reason. I wanted to disappear for a while. I'd just come out of a messy divorce, my apartment was a mess, and my head even more so. The invitation to isolate myself in a tiny town, far from everything, handling ancient artifacts in absolute silence, seemed exactly what I needed. A retreat, almost. When I arrived in Dunwich Hollow, everything seemed harmless. Crooked Victorian houses, wooden fences falling apart, and a constant mist covering the streets in the morning. The town was absurdly small. Most people had known each other since birth, and I was the strange outsider with an accent from elsewhere and nocturnal habits. I stayed in a wooden cabin on the outskirts of the historic center, near the river, a place that seemed taken from an old postcard. The silence at night was so absolute you could hear water hitting the stones outside. I should have felt at peace, but from the first night there, something felt off. I felt a presence in the cabin. I'm not saying this metaphorically. I'm saying that between midnight and 3 in the morning, there was someone inside with me. I never heard footsteps, nor distinct noises. It was worse. It was the complete absence of sound, as if the air froze, as if something was holding its breath along with me. On the second night, while organizing the Marin shipment documents, I noticed there was an item not on the original list. It was small, wrapped in thick fabric and tied with a knot that seemed more like a ritual symbol than a simple bow. The material was old leather, cracked by time. When I unwrapped it, I found the same amulet I saw this afternoon. Carved wood with symbols that didn't match any culture I knew, neither Celtic, Nordic, or Native American. It was something different, something that caused immediate revulsion. For some reason I still don't understand, I kept that object instead of registering it. Maybe on impulse? Maybe because deep down something told me that item was the center of everything. Since I touched it for the first time, my nights started becoming shorter. I began waking up in strange positions, with marks on my arms and legs I didn't remember causing. One night, I woke up to find all my belongings stacked in the center of the room, with the amulet on top of the pile. The front door was still locked from inside. I went to the local historian, an old man named Samuel Rake, who took care of the small town museum. He listened carefully and then told me something I never forgot. "You broke a seal, son, and seals don't like to be broken." Rake told me the Murrin family was involved with obscure esoteric practices coming from abroad. Some said they had brought something from the old world. Others, that they had created something new here. The fact was that since the last Murrin family members disappeared, the old estate's land had been avoided by everyone until someone accidentally dug it up. The following week, I started seeing reflections where there were no mirrors, images in glass, in people's eyes, even on the black screen of my turned-off phone. Something was watching me. Something was wearing my face. By then, I couldn't sleep. I began wandering the forest around the cabin, searching for an explanation. It was during one of these walks that I found the old basement entrance, half buried, hidden among twisted roots. And there, everything started to fall apart completely. But that belongs to the next chapter. I just needed to write this now, while I still am myself. Because sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I'm a second late to blink.
The town of Dunwich Hollow didn't seem like a place waiting for anyone. In fact, everything about it suggested it didn't want visitors anymore. The dirt roads narrowed as we approached, as if trying to convince us to turn back. The woods closed in at the edges, pine branches bent like skeletal fingers touching the car windows. The air was dense, humid, and heavy with the smell of rotting leaves, as if time there had stopped. I arrived one gray late afternoon in early October. The trees were already changing colors, and the mist rising from the ground looked like a living entity crawling through the houses with a purpose. No one was expecting me except for the young woman in the historic center, who handed me the chalet keys and gave me a nervous smile, like someone offering shelter to a condemned man. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to... Well, maybe it's better if you write down Samuel's number. He knows more about these things than I do." These things. She didn't explain what they were. The chalet was on the outskirts of town, at the edge of a small hill that sloped down to the Murrin River. The house was old, with exposed wooden beams, the smell of old paint and damp carpet. Still, it had a certain rustic charm. It was isolated enough to let me work in peace, or at least that's what I thought. There was a trail behind the house that led into the forest. It was partially covered with dry leaves and branches, as if no one had used it in a long time. And beside the house, a moss-covered iron fence, partly fallen, surrounded a small plot with uneven stones embedded in the ground. I thought they were old foundation markers, but later I found out they were graves. No names, no dates, just stones. The historic center was small, made up of a single two-story building with a hand-painted wooden sign, Meron Memorial, Dunwich Hollow Local Museum. That was where the collection I was to examine for the coming weeks was kept. On the very first day, I noticed no one in town wanted to talk much about the Merons. Some avoided my gaze, others just said, "Things of the past," and went back inside their homes. But the old local historian, Samuel Rake, met me with a direct look and heavy words. "It wasn't a good idea to bring that here, son. Those objects should have been left where they were. But they were found in the town soil. They're part of your history. Not everything that's part of history deserves to be told." At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration, an old superstitious man, maybe even jealous of what he considered his academic territory. But there was something in his eyes, something that wasn't fear. It was weariness, a kind of pain only carried by those who have seen too much and weren't believed. The museum itself was stuffy, poorly lit. The objects were stacked on makeshift shelves, many still wrapped in cloth, plastic bags, or yellowed boxes. There was a bit of everything: wooden amulets, symbols carved in stone, fragments of books, boxes with small bones, and even masks made of rawhide with uneven stitching where eyes should have been. I remember one looked like it was smiling, even without a mouth. On one of the museum's walls, there was a dusty portrait of Nathaniel Meron, the family patriarch. The painting was faded, but you could still see the dark, deep eyes like holes in a marble face. The caption read, "Nathaniel Meron, 1743 to 1799, founder of Dunwich Hollow, revered by many, forgotten by choice." Forgotten by choice. That phrase haunted me from the start. It was as if the town wanted to keep Nathaniel buried in more than one way. On my walks through the narrow streets, I noticed many houses were abandoned or sealed off, some with signs of old fires. The ones still inhabited seemed to keep their residents like fortresses, curtains always closed, doors with double locks, and no children playing in the streets. An old lady always watched me from the same window 3 houses down from the museum. One day, I waved. She didn't respond. She just closed the curtain with a sharp movement. One afternoon, while cataloging artifacts in the museum basement, I found a book covered with a black cloth, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It wasn't listed in any official boxes. It was a diary, hand-bound, with pages written in darkened ink and notes in rudimentary Latin mixed with a language I had never seen before. On the back cover, a single phrase written in Old English: "The tongue that shapes the flesh must not be heard aloud." I closed the book immediately, feeling an absurd pressure behind my eyes, as if something inside me was trying to break free. And that night, the noises started. First, the sound of footsteps upstairs in the chalet, even though I knew it had only 1 floor. Then came the whispers. Not recognizable words, but rhythms, like someone reciting something only the subconscious understood. In dreams, I began to see Nathaniel Meron's face, distorted, with skin stretched over bones and his mouth sewn shut with golden thread. And every time I woke from those dreams, the amulet appeared somewhere visible, on the pillow, on my papers, in the bathroom mirror. I started to think I had lost it, but it always came back. The morning I went to the forest behind the chalet, I didn't go by choice. I went because something was calling me. The trail that once seemed rarely used was now perfectly visible, as if cleared by human hands. I followed it for about 30 minutes until I reached a clearing. In the center was a kind of stone altar covered in lichen, marked with symbols similar to the amulet, symbols no one should know. And there, under intertwined roots, was the entrance to the stone structure, the buried basement. At the time, I didn't go down. At the time, everything inside me screamed to run away. But the worst was realizing someone or something had been there recently. There were footprints on the damp ground, not human, not exactly. And on top of the altar, placed with extreme care, was a lock of hair, long, human, still wet. I didn't tell anyone, not that week. I went back to the chalet and locked all the doors. I put salt on the windows as if to protect something. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. Because when I took off my shoes, the sole was marked with the same symbols as the stone, as if by stepping in that place, I had been marked. And that night, in the total darkness of my room, I saw a figure standing beside the bed. I don't know if I was asleep or awake. I only know it wore my face, but its eyes were completely black.
Things started moving on their own. During the first days after discovering the basement in the forest, I tried to keep my routine as if nothing had changed. I woke early, drank coffee looking at the river below, walked to the museum, and spent hours cataloging dusty pieces and centuries of silence. But it wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't the same anymore. Something, somewhere inside me had been disturbed. It was as if a crack had opened deep in my mind, and with each passing day, it widened a little more. The first thing I noticed was the mirrors. They started bothering me in a way they never had before. I'm not talking about strange reflections or things appearing behind me. It was worse. It was like the reflection took a fraction of a second longer to follow my movements. Small delays, blinks I didn't remember making, and sometimes smiles that didn't match what I was feeling. The Monday after my visit to the basement, I decided to take the amulet out of my backpack and throw it into the river. Not out of courage, but out of desperation. I walked to the riverbank, waited until I was sure no one was around, and threw the object with all the strength I had. It spun in the air, fell into the murky water, and sank without a trace. I stayed there for a few minutes, waiting to feel relieved. I didn't. I went back to the chalet, washed my face, and went to bed early that night. I woke up at 3:22 a.m. with the amulet on my chest. It was dry, as if it had never touched the water. The next day, while passing a group of children on the main street, one of them turned to me and whispered, "He likes your face." When I turned to ask what she meant, the girl was already far away, running toward her mother, but I could swear her eyes had turned black for a moment. Later, I returned to the museum, and something was wrong there too. The boxes had been disturbed, labels out of place, and among the objects I noticed a small clay figure I hadn't seen before. It was rustic, handmade, representing a human body with limbs twisted backwards as if bent during shaping. When I touched it, I felt a sudden warmth, as if the clay were still fresh. I wrote a note to catalog it later, but the next day, the figure had vanished. No one could explain, not even Samuel Rake. When I asked him about the basement symbols, he paled. "Did you see?" he asked. "I did. They were everywhere, and on the sole of my shoe." He ran his hand over his face, visibly disturbed. "They're invocation marks, but not to call something. They're seals of permanence. They don't let the thing leave." "The thing?" Samuel looked at me as if unwilling to answer, and when he did, it was almost a whisper. "What they created." what the Marins left behind. I laughed nervously. You talk like it's real. It is real. And now, it's watching you. After that, I began losing control over my body. Small lapses, forgetting where I left my keys, waking up in different clothes, encounters with locals claiming to have seen me in places I never was. A woman at the market thanked me for helping push her car on Sunday. But that Sunday I was locked inside, sweating, feverish, and nauseous with a sickness that didn't go away with medicine. But what disturbed me most was the notebook I kept by my bed. One night, I woke instinctively, feeling someone in the room. I turned on the light and saw no one. But when I looked at the notebook, it was open to a page written in my handwriting, though I didn't remember writing anything. You are an interesting shell. It adapts well to your fear. Keep eating little. Fear grows in the empty stomach. The words were heavily crossed out, and below was a drawing, a face, my face, but with completely black eyes and a mouth open like a pit. From that day on, nights ceased to be a safe place. I woke feeling hands gripping my ankles. The walls creaked as if someone walked inside them. The ceiling groaned even without wind. One night, the bedroom door slowly opened, even though it was locked. When I got up to close it, I noticed the bathroom mirror reflected a version of the living room I was in, but empty. I didn't appear in it. Nothing appeared. Just the chalet, as if I no longer existed. I tried to quit the job. I sent an email to the project contact, asking for early termination. I made up a health excuse, but the message never arrived. I found out through a call from the museum itself that my email bounced back with a "domain does not exist" error. When I checked the sent folder history, the message had disappeared. That same day, I returned to the hidden basement in the forest. I didn't want to, but something inside me needed to go back, as if guided by an invisible thread. I found the entrance just as before, but this time there were fresh footprints around. Footprints that looked like mine, the same pattern as my sneaker sole, but with extra toes. I entered, holding my flashlight shaking in my hand. The smell was unbearable. Moisture, rotten wood, and something else. Something like rusted iron and dried flesh. The air seemed to vibrate, as if the basement had its own pulse. On the walls, the symbols looked clearer, more alive, and at the back of the structure, there was a figure, sitting, with its face covered. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person. It was a grotesque sculpture, made of bones, human hair, and dry skin stretched like a cloak. But the most terrifying part was that the figure's face, or what should have been the face, was the same as the drawing that appeared in my notebook. I ran back. I fell, scraped myself all over, hit my head, but I didn't stop. I spent the night locked in the chalet bathroom, with the light on and the mirror covered with a towel. The next morning, when I finally gathered the strength to leave, I found my backpack at the door. Inside it, wrapped in a dark cloth, was the amulet, and along with it, a note on aged paper. You can no longer undo. He is hungry.
Since the day I discovered the entrance to the basement, nothing has been the same. The signs were no longer just faint whispers in the dark, they became clear, screaming voices, as if the forest itself was shouting my name. But I still resisted believing the obvious. I tried to explain everything as the result of exhaustion, isolation, my weary mind trying to protect itself, until the night of my first real encounter. I woke suddenly, as if pulled out of sleep by a sharp scream that wasn't coming from me. The clock read 3:14 a.m., always around 3 o'clock and a bit. It was as if some clock inside that place was stuck at that hour. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The chalet was plunged into absolute darkness, so dense it seemed to suck even the little warmth from the air. Even with my phone's flashlight in hand, the light seemed distorted, barely illuminating what was before me. That's when I heard the first sound. A whisper, coming from the living room. Low, indecipherable, but loaded with an almost painful urgency. I held my breath and started walking. The feeling of being watched grew with each step, as if dozens of invisible eyes were mapping all my movements. I reached the living room door and stopped. The whispers turned into voices, distinct voices, almost human but somehow wrong. Voices that cried, laughed, begged for help, then threatened with a fury that chilled the bones. There was no one there, only emptiness. But the feeling was so tangible, I could swear something touched my skin like cold fingers sliding down my arm. The flashlight flickered. For a moment, the room went completely dark. And then I saw it. A shadow was there. It wasn't solid. It had no defined shape. It was like it was made of black smoke, undulating, with edges dissolving into the air. But its eyes were two glowing cavities like dying embers shining red. I wanted to run, scream, flee, but my feet were glued to the floor. My body trembled, adrenaline pulsed hard, and my mind tried to process the impossible. The shadow spoke. Not with words, but with a strange sound, like an echo inside my head, a voice that sounded like mine, distorted, broken. Why did you come back? It was as if that question wasn't just for me, but for something deeper inside my being. I wanted to answer, but the voice dissipated like smoke carried by the wind. Suddenly, the shadow extended what looked like an arm, and an image formed before me. Quick, disjointed scenes. I saw flashes of an ancient ceremony, people wearing leather masks, rituals around an altar covered with symbols identical to the amulets. I saw a face, Nathaniel Murren's, with empty eyes, inaudible murmurs coming from his mouth. I blinked, and the image vanished. When the light returned, the shadow was gone. But something remained. A weight on my chest, a constant pressure, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. I felt my breathing grow harder, as if the air was being sucked away. I ran to the bedroom, locked the door behind me, and threw myself on the bed, sweating, eyes wide open, trying to convince myself all of it was madness, that I was sick, too tired, and that it would pass. But it didn't. In the following nights, the manifestations intensified. The shadow reappeared each time longer, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes during the afternoon when I least expected it. My mind began to fragment. I felt as if I was split between two realities, the one I knew and the one hunting me in the dark. And the worst of all, the shadow wasn't alone. Sometimes I felt other presences, voices whispering my name from every corner, invisible hands pulling me to the ground, eyes watching me in the mirrors even when I wasn't looking at them. I started to withdraw from the townspeople. I tried to tell what was happening, but no one believed me. Some even avoided looking at me. I didn't know if it was their fear or my own that isolated me. The historian, Samuel, grew more reserved as I spoke about what I had seen. "You entered a circle," he said, after hearing my story. "A circle that can't be broken without consequences." "What circle?" I asked, desperate. "The Murren circle. They tried to trap something there, something that should never be freed. But now that you've disturbed what was hidden, it's waking up." I wanted to run, disappear from there, but I felt it was too late. The shadow seemed to follow me no matter where I went. After that night when I saw the shadow, my mind became a constant battlefield. I knew something was
deeply wrong, but I didn't know what until I decided to dive headfirst into the museum archives, searching for any clue that could give me even a sliver of control over the situation. Samuel Rake was still my only connection to Dunwich Hollow, and as reluctant as he was, he agreed to show me a few things that weren't part of the public collection. He led me to a hidden room in the basement of the museum, a stuffy space filled with dust and the damp smell of mold. The walls were worn wooden panels and shelves stacked with ancient books, maps, and objects wrapped in cloth. Among the papers, I found a series of journals written by Nathaniel Murren and his descendants. What I read there wasn't just disturbing, it was terrifying. Nathaniel's own journal spoke of an entity called the Watcher, a creature that, according to him, dwelled in the shadows of the forest surrounding the town, capable of bending reality and invading the minds of the living. It was as if the Watcher had been imprisoned by the Murren family, sealed inside a circle made of symbols and dark rituals, meant to protect the town and perhaps the world from its wrath. But the journals revealed the seal was far from perfect. Over generations, members of the family had gone missing, gone mad, or simply vanished without a trace. Samuel told me the basement entrance where I had been was part of that circle, a symbolic and physical prison. When you stepped in there, even without knowing, you broke the seal, and that started the process of the Watcher breaking free. Every page of the journals was filled with symbols I had already seen: the amulet, the altar stones, the markings on the sole of my shoe. It was all connected. Even more disturbing were accounts of people who, like me, had been pursued by the entity and ended up trapped in an endless cycle of fear and madness. One passage in particular sent a chill down my spine. The Watcher does not merely observe, it desires possession. It whispers twisted truths, and whoever hears it for the first time is never the same again. In addition to the journals, Samuel showed me audio tapes recorded by former residents who had tried to document the paranormal phenomena in the town. In one of them, a trembling voice described impossible sounds, voices in forgotten languages, and the overwhelming sense of something always being just behind them. I listened to the recording in silence, my heart pounding. It was like hearing my own story. After that day in the archives, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the Watcher's presence just outside the edges of my consciousness, pressing against my thoughts like a hand on a foggy mirror. I began seeing reflections of myself in places I hadn't been. Once I caught a glimpse of myself standing behind me in the kitchen, just out of reach, unmoving and staring. I turned around, and of course, nothing was there. But the worst came when I started hearing my own voice whispering things I never said. Sometimes from inside the closet, sometimes from under the bed, sometimes from inside my own head. "I'm already in," it said once. "You invited me." I began to understand something that terrified me more than death. The Watcher wasn't just after my body. It wanted my thoughts, my memories, my identity. It wanted to wear me like a mask. And worse, it was learning to. One night, I woke up to find myself standing outside in the freezing cold, barefoot, staring into the woods. I had no memory of how I got there. My journal was gone. My phone was gone. And when I got back inside, the front door was still locked from the inside. I wasn't alone anymore. I reached out to Samuel in desperation, asking if there was any way to undo what had been done. He said, "There might be a way, but it's not something you want to face. You'll have to go back to the place where it began, and you'll have to finish what your ancestors started." He handed me a key, old, rusted, and warm to the touch. He added, "Whatever you do, don't listen to its voice. If it starts sounding like you, run." I left that night with the key in my pocket and a prayer in my throat. I don't know if I'll survive this. I don't know if I'm even still me, but I'm going back to that basement. If this is the end, I want to look it in the eye.
From the moment I understood what I had unleashed, everything began to fall apart. The sense of safety I had tried to cling to became a distant mirage, an illusion that dissolved more with each passing moment. The Watcher wasn't just a presence, it was a predator, and I was its prey. The first attacks were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. A chill running down my spine, a whisper that vanished the moment I turned my head. But things escalated quickly. One rainy night, I woke up to the sound of something scratching at the front door of the cabin. It was a dry, insistent sound, like nails splintering the wood. My breath quickened. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the window. Outside, there was nothing but wet darkness. But then I saw it. Deep marks etched into the door. Symbols I recognized from the journals and the amulet. "He's here," I whispered. The days that followed were a series of increasingly direct terrors. Whenever I walked through the forest, I felt invisible eyes tracking me. Branches snapped behind me, but whenever I turned around, no one was there. At night, the shadow returned, growing larger, more defined. Its voice invaded my head, blending threats with mockery. I could no longer sleep properly, and when I did, the nightmares were too vivid to ignore. I began to notice changes in myself. My skin turned pale, my eyes sunken. I struggled to remember simple things, and at times felt overwhelming rage I couldn't control. The few people I tried to talk to avoided me. It was as if the town itself had rejected me, like they could sense I was marked. One night, trying to escape the torment, I grabbed the car keys and drove to the edge of the forest. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. But on the way, the car radio began to hiss, and for a brief moment, whispers came through the static. It was my name. I jerked the steering wheel, trying to ignore it, but the whispering continued. And then I noticed, in the rearview mirror, a figure sitting in the back seat, a shadowy silhouette with glowing red eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. I was alone. Back at the cabin, the lights started flickering by themselves. Furniture seemed to move on its own. The amulet would vanish and reappear in impossible places. The shadow began taking on more human forms, almost tangible. It mimicked voices, whispered secrets only I knew, accused me, threatened me with twisted memories. One night, I heard the bedroom door slowly creak open. A cold hand grabbed my arm, tight. I tried to scream, but my voice failed. It was the shadow, but it was wearing my face. I saw my own black eyes, my mouth twisted in a grotesque smile. "You can't escape," it whispered, in my voice. "You will always be mine." That was the moment my sanity began to crack. I spent days locked in my room, surrounded by protective symbols I found in the journals. I tried to hold on, but the entity seemed to slip into every corner, every thought. I tried asking for help online, but the messages disappeared and the calls never connected. I was completely cut off. The worst part? I started to wonder if the shadow wasn't me after all, or a broken part of myself. But I knew I couldn't give in.
because if I did, it would win. The days leading up to the confrontation were a blur of fear, exhaustion, and heavy silence. I knew I couldn't run from the Watcher anymore. He had already invaded every corner of my mind and life. Desperate, I returned to the hidden basement in the forest, the epicenter of it all, armed only with the few items Samuel had given me: candles, hand-drawn symbols, and an old iron knife, its blade stained and corroded by time. The air was thick, a mix of damp earth, rotting wood, and something I couldn't quite place, a sweet, almost sickening smell that seemed to vibrate in my chest. As I lit the candles and drew the symbols on the floor, I felt the presence growing, like a shadow stretching to fill the space around me. It was time to face it. The shadow emerged suddenly, more solid and threatening than ever. Its red eyes burned like embers, and its voice echoed inside my head with a power that felt capable of tearing through my soul. "Why do you keep resisting?" it whispered, my voice distorted. "You belong to me." I was trembling, but I steadied the hand holding the knife. I had to believe it was possible to break the cycle, close the seal, end this torment. I began reciting the words Samuel had taught me, an ancient prayer full of meanings I barely understood, but heavy with the hope of banishing the Watcher. The shadow laughed, a horrible sound that echoed through the basement walls. "You're weak," it said, "just like the others who tried before you." The warmth of the candles seemed to fade, the darkness thickened, and the air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Then I felt it, the blade of the knife being pulled by an invisible force. I fought against the weight, sweat dripping from my forehead, my heart pounding. The shadow moved closer, arms reaching out to envelop me. Its voice became a deafening scream inside my mind. In the middle of the chaos, the knife cut through something, not the shadow, but something internal, like severing an ancient bond, breaking chains that had bound me. The shadow let out a shriek and recoiled, leaving behind a crushing silence. I felt my body collapse onto the cold basement floor, exhausted but free. Or so I thought. When I opened my eyes, I saw something that froze my blood. A human figure stood at the entrance, its face covered with the same dry, cracked skin as the sculpture from the basement. It was Nathaniel Marin. He spoke with a calm voice, but every word cut like a blade. "The cycle doesn't end. It never ends. You can run, fight, but the Watcher always finds a way." He reached out his hand. In his palm, a small mirror shimmered, the mirror of the seal. "You have to choose. Stay trapped here or accept what must come." The world spun. The choice felt impossible. But in that moment, I understood. The confrontation wasn't just with some external entity. It was with the fear inside me, the part of me that wanted to give up, that longed to surrender. I held the mirror, staring into my distorted reflection. The shadow drew near, ready to consume me. With one last breath, I shattered the mirror. The glass exploded into a rain of light that filled the basement, illuminating the symbol-covered walls, and for a brief moment, I felt peace. But as the shards hit the ground, I heard a distant, cold laughter, one that promised this wasn't over. After I shattered the mirror, everything changed, and at the same time, nothing changed. The basement felt lighter, less oppressive, as if a dense fog had been lifted. I felt a fleeting relief, a faint hope that maybe the nightmare was finally coming to an end. But life went on, and the watcher never truly disappeared. I returned to the cabin, hoping silence would once again take over, that the whispers would stop, that the fear would become nothing more than a distant memory. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I could still feel an invisible gaze piercing through my skin. The amulet reappeared several times, sometimes on the table, other times under the bed, as if it wanted to remind me that the connection had never truly been severed. My sleep was never peaceful again. Nightmares filled with red eyes and distorted whispers haunted me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, feeling like I was being watched even in the safety of my own bedroom. The scar on my arm, the one that appeared after that night in the basement, became a permanent reminder of what I had faced, a mark in the shape of a symbol, unreadable, pulsing with a cold energy that made me shiver. I tried to move on with life, with work, with the people who still remained close, but there was a growing distance between me and the world, as if I was living in a shadow that no one else could see. When I told Samuel that I still felt the Watcher's presence even after everything, he just sighed. "You broke the cycle, but it can't be destroyed, only delayed." "What's going to happen to me?" I asked, fearing the answer. "He'll always find a way to return, through you or through someone else." Deep down, I knew he was right. On bright days, I pretended nothing had ever happened. I smiled, worked, made small talk. But when night fell, the fear came back, and with it the certainty that I would never escape that shadow. The Watcher had embedded himself in my mind, in my soul, and maybe, somewhere out there, he was still waiting.